Understanding God's Plan, Lesson 6. I'm trying to number these so that people will know and know when I look them up. And I've had different. Also, help me remember tonight. It's been requested that if any of you ask a question or make during the session, if you ask a question, they want me to repeat the question because they don't hear the question. So anyway, help me remember to do that. Lesson 6, Understanding God's Plan. We've been going through the process from the time that Adam and Eve were created and how they broke covenant with God and they decided that they were smarter than God and wanted to be their own God. And we've been having troubles ever since. And we have continued through that process, the covenant that God made with Noah, and then the covenant He made with Abraham. And through that lineage that we have been following through, and we have followed, last time we talked about Isaac and him getting a wife and where he went to where they sent to get his wife and so on. And so we're going to be in the 29th chapter of Genesis tonight is where we're going to start. And if we get through it, if we're not, we'll finish it up next week. But if we get finished, I'll be finishing the 50th chapter, the last chapter of Genesis, before we leave here tonight, unless I run out of time. If we run out of time, we'll continue as we can. So anyway, Genesis 29:19. Laban replied, "Better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay with me." So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife." After he had worked, remember he agreed here to work 7 years for Rachel, working for Laban. 23rd verse, it says, "That evening Laban took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and he slept with her. And Laban gave his slave Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her slave." Now, who had Jacob worked 7 years for?
Rachel. He cheated her.
Rachel. And he wakes up the next morning and says, "This is not Rachel. This is Leah." Anyway, 25th verse. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Wasn't it for Rachel that I worked for you? Why have you deceived me?" He said, "Why have you deceived me like this?" And then Laban comes up with, he says, "Look, where we're from in our part of the country, it's custom that the younger can't get married until the older one is married. And so I had to give you Leah first." And look, so I wouldn't have bought that excuse if I'd have been Jacob. But anyway, he made the excuse and he said, if you work for me 7 more years, I'll give you Rachel. And he said, okay. So he was going to work another 7 years to get Rachel, the one he had already worked 7 years to get in the first place. And he winds up with Leah. And I can tell you, Dinah has one sister, older sister. If I had married Diana and I had to wake in the next morning and saw Liz laying there beside me, I would have been a little upset too. And I think Diana would have been upset too. So I can understand his being a little ticked off with the situation. So anyway, he winds up working another 7 years. Well, I put a comment down there. Laban was setting up a struggle here that would last for years because of what he did. And if I don't understand these people where they'll have 3 or 4 wives.
I think you'd be exhausted.
I wouldn't take $5 million for my wife. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for another one. I don't want 2 at the same time. It's just that simple. But back then they would do it, and there's still some of them today that have multiple wives. So anyway, he was creating a conflict, and you can see how that would be when you have 2 sisters that are married to the same man. You're going to have a problem, and you did. So I'm going to go through the 12 sons of Jacob, and you're going to see how it plays out in the scripture and what their names are, what their names meant, and it had to do with their situation that they were in. So Leah had Reuben. Behold a son is what Reuben, basically what Reuben means. It says, surely the Lord has looked upon my affliction. So she named him Reuben. Then she has a second one. Now, let me get... Leah winds up having 6 children herself by Jacob. So Jacob didn't hate her as bad as what he claimed he did it to begin with, or he would have had that many kids. And we don't know how many daughters. We know of at least one because it named one, and we'll talk about tonight. But anyway, so then she had Simeon, means to hear. And she said, because the Lord has heard that I was hated, unloved. So each name she's naming, it's because of her struggle that she's had. She doesn't feel loved because she knows that she was forced upon Jacob, and evidently she was hoping it would turn out better than what it did. But anyway, then she had Levi. It means joined, or to be joined to, attached. It says, because I have borne him 3 sons. In other words, if you read the full context, because I've borne him 3 sons, surely Jacob will love me now. Surely he will be joined to me now. And so that's the reason she named him that name. So you can see each name has to do with the situation that they were in. Then she gave birth to Judah, which means praise, or praises, praising. She says, now will I praise the Lord. In other words, it's another chance. I have a 4th son. He's getting all kind of sons by me. Surely he'll love me. Well, Rachel hadn't had any children, hadn't been able to have any children. And she if you read through the scripture in this particular area in Genesis, you'll see that she goes to Jacob and says, you haven't given me any children. He said, it's not my fault. I mean, he could have said, look, your sister's she's dropping them out one right after another. It's problem's not on my end. So she comes up with a good plan. And so when she left home, her father, Laban, gave her a handmaiden named Bilhah. So she gives this handmaiden, this maid, to Jacob, and says, have sons with her, and that will be my sons. Now, any of you women would have done that if you'd been in the same situation, right? You just said, okay. And so she named the first son Dan, means judge or judging. Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice. In other words, we're still in that same conflict between her and Leah. And she's saying, God has heard my voice, so now I have a son, although Bilhah is the one that had the son. And then she has Naphtali. She has another son. Wrestling my struggle, Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled, and I have prevailed. Okay, so how many sons do you have so far? 6. Okay, he's got 6. Just keep a count. But so far he has 6. Well, Leah saw how good this was working out for Rachel, and she had quit having children. She said, I'll take my handmaiden Zilpah, and I'll give her to Jacob, my husband, to have sons by her, so that we can have some more sons, and they'll be my sons. So she had Gad. Zilpah had Gad, named Troop, or good fortune. She said, what good fortune is what she said when the son was born, because now she had this son. Then Zilpah had Asher, had another son. Blessed and happiness is what it means. And Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, gave birth to Asher. Leah said, happy am I, for the daughter will call me blessed. She said, the daughter will call me blessed because I have another son, although this other son was not from me. It was from Zilpah, who was my handmaid that I gave to my husband to have children. So now, how many sons does Jacob have? He has 8. Okay, you're keeping track. I got to tell you the story that goes with this. Reuben, who was the oldest of the sons that had so far, he was out during the time of the wheat harvest, I think it was, and he'd run across from some mandrakes. You know what a mandrake is? Good. You can read all the different kind of ideas and concepts of what mandrakes are. I don't know that we're really sure. I've never eaten a mandrake that I know of. So we're not sure what it is. But anyway, he ran across some mandrakes. So he brings them back to his mama, back to Leah. And Rachel is there. And Rachel said, how about giving me some of those mandrakes? Leah said, you've already taken my husband. You're going to take my son's mandrakes now? Rachel said, if you give me some of those mandrakes, I'll see to it that Jacob sleeps with you tonight. Is this a fouled up family or what? This is a strange crowd. You give me some of this, whatever that fruit, it'd be peaches. If we'll say peaches, because you know what peaches are. You give me some of those peaches, and I'll see to it that Jacob sleeps with you tonight. And she said, okay, it's the deal. This is God's chosen people, okay? Now, I just want you to remember this. So Leah has Issachar, means wages or hire, reward. So you see, she paid for it. She said, God has given me my hire. She bought this son with Jacob from Rachel. Anyway, it's one way to look at it. Then she has another son, Zebulun. It means to dwell or honor. Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So how many sons does Jacob have altogether? He has 10. So he got 10, already has 10. So we don't know how many daughters. Like I said, it names one daughter by name, and we'll talk about her in just a minute. So her name is Dinah. So we know he had one daughter. We don't know if he had 40 daughters. We have no idea. We just know how many sons he had, because that's the way they're counting it. So Rachel, then she finally gets pregnant, and she gives birth to Joseph. And it says, to add to or added, depending on how you look up the definition, to add to my family, said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And she gets pregnant again, and she has a son, names him Benoni, and you see I've got a slash there, Benjamin, and you'll see because she named him Benoni because it means son of my sorrow. She was dying as she was giving birth to Benoni, so she named him son of my sorrow. So after he died, they buried her because she had died. And you can see there it says, with her last breath, for she was dying, she named him Benoni. But his father called him Benjamin, which is son of my right hand, which was smart of Jacob. Would you want to be named the son of my sorrow? What's your name? I'm son of my sorrow. Okay, well, I'd rather be son of my right hand. That's a lot better than son of my sorrow. So now, how many sons does he have? How many tribes is there in Israel? 12, okay. And they're all based on the 12 sons that he has with his 4 different wives now. He's had 4 different ones. He's had Leah, had Bilhah, Zilpah, and Rachel. Had sons by all of them, and it adds up to 12. 6 of them are from Leah. The birthright. You remember we talked about the birthright. Firstborn, thus meaning the rights of the firstborn, the due of the primogeniture. The ancient custom was that the family name and titles passed through the line of the eldest son. Which one of Jacob's sons should have received the birthright according to that? Which one was the oldest? And I'm going to give you a list so it'll help you. Which one's there you go. You did good. Reuben was the oldest, so who was supposed to receive the birthright? Reuben. Did he receive the birthright? No, he probably didn't, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But what we're looking at here is we're beginning to see up until now, and the birthright has started with Abraham. God made a covenant with Abraham. This covenant was passed down through a birthright to his son Isaac, and that was passed down through his son Jacob. Not Esau, who was the oldest, because you remember Jacob bought the birthright from his brother Esau for a bowl of soup. I say soup, whatever. You can look it up, and it says many different things depending on what translation it is. But you see the sons there. We have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And that's the order in which they were born. The first 4 were from Leah. The next 2 were Bilhah. The next 2 were Zilpah. The next 2 were Leah. And the last 2 were Rachel's. That's the way the sons came about. So which one did the birthright pass down through? I know you don't... So you can guess, you can do all you want to, but it's not going to matter at this point. So let's. I just wanted to ask that question so we can kind of focus in where we are. We know the birthright is being passed down from generation to generation and generation. There's a reason for that birthright. There's a reason for that covenant. And that covenant with Abraham is the reason that the Jews are God's chosen people, is because they're of the lineage of Abraham, whom God made a covenant with, and it was through him he was bringing the Messiah into the world. It's where we'll eventually get to. Genesis 32:24. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Now, you all have heard this story and read this story where Jacob was left there and he wrestled with, and we see it in picture. It shows an angel wrestling with him. You can look it up in any translation, anyone you want to, anywhere you want to. This word here is not angel. It's man. Who was this man? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. Was it an angel? I don't know. The name, that the Hebrew word that's used means man. It doesn't mean angel. Does that mean it wasn't an angel? No. So I just want to get all that behind us before I go any further. We don't know, but whoever this man was representing God in one form or another because of what happens after this. So go down to the 28th verse. It says, your name will no longer be Jacob, he said. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. So, let's look at the names and the meanings of the names. When Jacob was born, he was named Jacob by his mother, and which means heel catcher or supplanter. In other words, he replaces somebody. And if you look at supplanter I looked up Merriam-Webster, so I wouldn't have to tell you what it means. We can read it from what they say. Someone or something taking the place of another, as through force, scheming, strategy, or the like. In other words, you're going to take the place. And so, how does that refer to Jacob? Why would Rebecca? I think I said Rachel, but why would Rebecca have named him this? What did God tell Rebecca when she was giving birth to these boys? The older would serve the younger, is what he told her. He said the older will serve the younger. So the younger is going to replace the older. And so he's named supplanter. He's named heel catcher because when he was born, he had a hold of Esau's heel, if you remember the story. And this, when God spoke to her, and was it an angel? Was it a vision? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. Those things are not told to us, but he just says that he did. So anyway, that was his name. Well, that's what he'd been living with as a name for generations, all the way through the time he had come here. He had been living with that name. This man, this angel, this being, whoever it was that wrestled with Jacob, changed his name to Israel. Israel means Prince of God, struggling with God, and wrestler with God. The way I've seen it written many times, and I like this. It's wrestles with God and prevails. He wrestled with God, and he was wrestling with this man, and the man said, it's almost, the sun's about to come up, and I need to leave. You need to let me go. And Jacob said, I'm not going to let you go until you give me a blessing. You bless me. And that's when the man says, he said, I'm going to change your name. Your name's going to be Israel. So now his name's Israel. And we know Israel as a nation, but that was Jacob's name. That's what it was changed to from Jacob by God. In Jacob's name, Israel, we see the beginning of a nation. If I say Israel now, what do you think? If we were just talking, I'd just say Israel. What do you think? A nation. You think a country over in the Middle East where the Jewish people have made a homeland, which is Israel, which we call Israel. By the way, it's not Palestine. The whole area is Palestine. Has never been a Palestinian state. I hate to break the news to them. There's never been a Palestinian state. So when they're arguing about they want a Palestinian state or not, they don't want Israel to be there. That's what it amounts to. You can read the different literature and so on it. But Israel we see now as a nation, as a country where people live. This was a man's name. This was Jacob's name. This was the beginning of this nation. And I wrote down here, the Abrahamic covenant was passed down through the birthright from father to son. After Jacob, the birthright was passed down through a family which became a nation. So this birthright is it breaks out of its bounds of being from father to oldest son to oldest son to oldest son to oldest son. It's within this family, and we'll see some of that in just a minute. And it's becoming a nation within this nation, within this family. So this family is it's because you remember God told Abraham, he says, your descendants will be as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. In other words, you're going to have a bunch of them. And there's a bunch of them out there, and they've been for many generations now. Genesis 37:1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Is that a good idea? Is that smart to be a tattletale and go tell on your brother? Is that a smart thing to do? Well, if we go back here, okay, so who he was working with was Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher is if you go back and see who he was out there working with, and we don't know who all was out there, but he was working with them, and he came back and told on them to his dad, which was not very smart thing for him to do. But anyway, so he gave them that report. 37:3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons. Is that a good idea? If you have 12 sons and you love one of them better, do you need to let them know that? Do you need to do anything to show that? It's not smart, is it? Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with it, and he talks about that in just a minute. But here he is. He's showing partiality to one of his sons in a very visual way. He says, Joseph was a son born of him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. And the coat of many colors, you can read different things and translations of the way that is, and it's not totally clear, but it was a special coat. We'll say that. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. It created a problem, and it was Jacob's fault. It was Israel's fault that you create this problem because he showed partiality to one of his sons. You can if you have more than one child, you can love one and like one more than you do the others. You just don't let them know. You don't let it be, and don't do anything to show that you do. A comedian was listening to it, and he says, if anybody out here that has more than one child, you have the one that you like better than the others. He says, you just want to tell the truth about it, but you can't let them know which one it is. Well, I can tell you, I love things about my daughters, one over the other, but I don't have a favorite. To make things even worse, and you can read what I have here, but I'll tell you what, Joseph started having dreams. And he dreamed that they were out and they had their sheaves together that were standing up, and there was 12 sheaves, which represented one of each one of Jacob's sons, of Israel's sons, and 11 of them all bowed down to one, which was Joseph. Is that a smart thing to tell your brothers? Okay. Then he had another dream, and he dreamed about the sun and the moon and 12 stars, and all the 11 stars and the sun and the moon, which the sun and the moon was his mother and father, and the 11 were his brothers, all bowed down to him. And he told them. Is that smart? We're seeing some dumb decisions being made here by a lot of people who are God's chosen people. That gives me hope. If they can be this stupid and be God's chosen people, then I've got a chance. That's all I can tell you. Because this is not smart. But he told them this, and even his father said, are you saying that your mother and I are going to bow down to you? Well, it never really answers that. But anyway. 37:10, he told his father and his brothers, but his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is this that you have had? He said, are your mother and brothers and I going to come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. What happened to Joseph because of sharing these little nuggets of wisdom with his brothers? Why, he wound up in trouble, didn't he? He came out to visit his brothers when they were out in the fields, and they said, here comes Jacob. I think we ought to kill him. We need to kill this fella. He's created too much problem for us. He thinks he's special. We'll show him how special I'm making this up. This is not in the Bible. You're saying, isn't his mother dead? I'm repeating it for the camera. He said, wasn't his mother dead at this time? Yes. She died. Right. But it doesn't explain any of that. That's just what it says. But she died giving birth to Benjamin, who was already born at this particular time. He comes drifting out there to visit his brothers, and they decide they're going to kill him. So they throw him in this pit. And while he's in this pit, saw a caravan coming by, and they said, hey, why don't we make some money off of him? We'll sell him as a slave. Do you think Joseph was tickled about his dreams at this point? He might have thought, I might have messed up. So they sold him, and we know what happened when he was sold, and Potiphar bought him in Egypt, and talk about a run of bad luck. He did great at running. Potiphar put him in charge of all of his household because he was so good, and he was a very loyal servant, very loyal slave. And so he put him in charge of everything, and Potiphar was out of town, and Joseph was in the house, and Potiphar's wife kind of say, goes there cuddling on Joseph and wants to go to bed with him. He said, he turned around and runs out of the house, and she has his coat still in her hand. And she said, I'll take care of him. When Potiphar gets back, he said, you see this coat? He was here trying to take advantage of me while you were gone. So Potiphar throws him in prison. I say again, he's probably thinking, why did I tell him about those stupid dreams? Why didn't I just leave it alone while I was ahead? But he didn't. In Genesis 34, we're not going to read this, but I want to tell you, but we'll tell you this because this goes with the story of what's coming up in the future. I told you that only names one of the daughters. We don't know how many of the daughters were had, but Dinah was one of them, and she was Leah's daughter. So her brothers were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and Issachar and Zebulun, I think, were the other two. Anyway, whichever ones, you have to take my word for it and go back and read it and see which one. So anyway, she was the sister to these boys, and the area where they're living in, a guy named Shechem, whichever way you like to pronounce it, grabbed her and raped her. Well, after he realized he was in love with her. He loved this woman. So he goes to the family there and says, I'll give you whatever you want. I want to marry her. So Simeon and Levi, without their father knowing it, goes to Shechem and his father and says, here's what we'll do. it's probably a good idea so that we could marry your daughters and you could marry our daughters and we could kind of live in harmony here together. And your son wants to marry Dinah and wants to have her as his wife, and which we think is a good idea, but there's only one thing that's required. Unless you're circumcised, you can't take a wife of any of our daughters. And they said, okay, so we'll do that. He said, but you all need to do it. Your whole crowd needs to do it on the same day. Now, this all comes out of the Bible. I'm not making these up. So anyway, this is what they tell them. And it says, at 3 days, when they were still very sore, Simeon and Levi come in and kill the last one of the men that's in the town, that's in the area. Killed them all. Their dad's not happy. Genesis 34:30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me, making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. We are few in number. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. He was not happy with them for what they did. Okay, let's count it up. In the number of sons that he had, where do they come in line? We have Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. So this is the second and third son that have done this. So if the birthright doesn't go to the oldest son, which would be Reuben, you'd think, well, maybe it will go to the next son, which would be Simeon, and then Levi, and after that would be Judah, and so on down the line, but that's not the way it works. 38:1. At that time, Judah left his brothers and settled near an Adulamite. This is a story, this is in this, if you notice, it's situated between where we're trying to go here, and it seems like this story is just thrown out there. Go back and look just a second. We're talking about God's chosen people. And these two pull a fast one on all the men and kill them all. Does that sound like God's chosen people? It doesn't sound like it to me. Well, then it throws this one in here, and I think it does to show us just how carnal and how sorry this bunch was. And this is Judah. It's at that time Judah left his brothers and settled near an Adulamite named Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. He took her as a wife and slept with her. She conceived and gave birth to a son. He named him She conceived again and gave birth to a son, named him Onan. She gave birth to another son and named him Shelah. Not Sheila like Sheila, but Sheila. Some say Selah, but anyway. It was at Chezib that she gave birth to him. So she has 3 sons. She dies. She dies. And I put it here, to the actions of Simeon and Levi, it looked like God has chosen people. Why would God continue to call these people as chosen people? Here's what happens with the story. I didn't put all the scripture because it would take more time than what we need to. Judah's wife dies. He's in mourning, not feeling he goes into town with some of them. Let me back up. I missed part of the story. His oldest son gets married to Tamar. He dies before he has any sons. Well, Judah tells his second son, says, you need to take your brother's wife, and your first son that you have by your brother's wife will be his son. So you need to pass on the seed through him. Well, he went to bed with her, but he saw to it that she didn't get pregnant, and he died. Well, now Judah has lost 2 sons. Okay, 2 of them have died because of this woman Tamar. Is what it kind of how he looks at it. He said, Tamar, listen, my youngest boy, he's too young to get married. Why don't you go back and live with your dad and your mom for a while, and when he gets old enough, I'll come get you. She says, okay. Well, the problem is for Judah is that she's good at math. And she got to figuring up after a while, she said, that boy's old enough to marry. And Judah has not sent for me. And then she gets word that Judah's coming to town. His wife had died. He's heading to town. And so she dresses up like a prostitute with a veil, sits out at the gate. And when Judah comes out there, he propositions who he doesn't know who she is. He propositions her, and he goes and sleeps with her. And he said, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to send you so many sheep to pay for sheep. Hey, you need to leave me something as a guarantee. He said, well, I'll leave. She said, I want your signet ring, your staff, and your scarf. I want you to leave those with me. And when you send the sheep, I'll send these back. He says, okay, it's the deal. So he left them. And he goes, when he gets back home, he gets back from his trip, he gets his servant and he says, here's the sheep. Take them to this prostitute that's in there and pay her. When he gets there, you can't find any prostitute. You ask people, and say, we don't have anybody like that here. There's no, I don't know what you're talking about. We've never had a woman that's sitting out there, a woman of the evening, or whatever you want to call her, a prostitute sitting out there. We don't know what you're talking about. And he says, well, it'd be too embarrassing to carry it any further, so we're going to leave it alone. Just going to forget it. Well, a few months go by, and Judah gets word that Tamar is pregnant. He said, she has been doing bad things. She's gotten pregnant. He said, we need to have her killed. And so sends to the town. She said, I tell you what you do. You go back and tell Judah that the owner of this signet and the owner of this scarf and the owner of this staff is the father of this baby. And he carries it back to Judah, and Judah says, oh. And so he sends for Tamar and brings her back home to live with him, and she winds up having a couple of sons. The oldest was Perez, and if you look in the lineage of Jesus, you'll find out he's in the lineage of Jesus. He's in the lineage of David. Does this sound like God's chosen people? Does Judah sound like he's what could be God's chosen people? These people are about as carnal, about as bad as you can find anywhere. And this is God's chosen people. When God makes a covenant, he does not break his covenant. When God makes us a promise, he does not break his promise. And this covenant is what's going to bring Jesus into this horrible family that's as carnal as you can find is going to be how Jesus gets into the world. Can you believe that? Genesis 45:4. Then Joseph, this is going down a good while after that. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. And they came near. I am Joseph, your brother, he said, the one you sold into Egypt. Now, what happened in between here and what we just read? He had been sold he was in prison, and the Pharaoh has a dream. And he gets telling his people, his staff and all about it, I've had this dream and it's just worrying me to death. I don't know what it is. And they said, then I had another dream and it's just as bad as this one. And I don't know what it means. And one of them that had been released from prison that was a prisoner along with Joseph. I'm making this shorter than what it is in the Bible. But he says, hey, I just met a fellow he's good at interpreting dreams. Hey, so we'll bring him in here. And he brings him in there and he tells him what it's going to be. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. Well, during the period of famine, they also were having famine in the land of Canaan, where his family was. So his brothers come, Jacob calls them in there, Israel calls them in there and says, listen, I want you to take some money. I want you to go to Egypt. I hear they have a bunch of grain, and I want you to buy some so we don't starve to death. They say, okay. So they head up there, and they don't recognize Joseph. Well, I'm quite sure he's dressed up a little different. He's grown up since that time. He has sons of his own. He has children of his own. He's grown now, and he kind of plays with them a little bit and sends them back, and then they find out that the stuff they had left, they find it in their bag. Their money is in their bag along with stuff that belonged to Joseph. And they said, oh, man, this is bad news. And they go back and they bag, and he said, well, just leave one of you stay here, and the other one go back. He said, you told me you had a younger brother. I want you to bring him, which was Benjamin. And so he goes back and tells Jacob. Jacob says, I've already lost one son. I'm not sending Benjamin. The only one he has left of Rachel's children is Benjamin. I'm not going to send Benjamin. And so anyway, it goes all through that particular process and so on. And they get back there, and wouldn't you be upset if you were sitting there? Pharaoh has the power to kill you right on the spot. Joseph is second only to Pharaoh in power. You know that this man standing here, he's holding your life in his hands. So they were upset. And then he calls them over there and he says, I'm Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. You think that cheered them up? You think that cheered them up when they, oh, you're Joseph. That one. The Bible has some good stories, doesn't it? It's true, but it has some meaning. We'll get there in a minute. And now don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years. Remember, he said there are going to be 7 years of famine. He said there are going to be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Do you think God could have sent him there without going through all this? Yes, absolutely could. Do you think he could have talked these bunch of idiots into doing it? No. Could you think he could talk Joseph? Joseph is telling all of his brothers, you're going to be bowing down to me. And he's tickled because he's Dad's favorite. So, I mean, none of these people, God would have a hard time explaining all this, but through all that they did bad, it wound up turning out to be something good. Do you think Joseph thought it was when he was in prison? We talk about people being in prison now. Prison now is like the Holiday Inn compared to the way prisons were back then. Back then, it was a desperate situation. People died in those prisons all the time, starved to death, and died of all kinds of things. And they just hauled them out and threw them in a hole and covered them up. They're done with them. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Genesis 48:1. Sometime after this, Joseph was told, your father is weaker. So he set out with his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel summoned his strength and sat up in the bed. So you get the picture now. Joseph is bringing his 2 sons to his dad before his dad dies. Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make many nations come from you, and I will give this land as an eternal possession to your future descendants. This is what he's telling him. Your 2 sons born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are now mine. Ephraim and Manasseh belong to me just as Reuben and Simeon do. So what was he doing? He was adopting Joseph's 2 sons as his own sons. Who would get the double portion now out of all of his sons? It would be Joseph, the one that he loved more than all the rest of them. It would be those 2, and you can follow this, and we'll talk about these as the weeks go on. But anyway, this is what he's doing. So Jacob said, bring them to me, and I will bless them. Now his eyesight was poor because of old age. He could hardly see. Joseph brought them to him, and he kissed and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again, but now God has even let me see your offspring. Then Joseph took them from his father's knees and bowed with his face to the ground. Then Joseph took them both with his right hand, Ephraim, toward Israel's left hand. Now picture this, Ephraim and Manasseh. And with his left hand, Manasseh. Manasseh is the oldest of the 2. So the greater blessing is supposed to go to which one? Manasseh. Well, the one he lays his right hand on is the one that's going to get the greater blessing. And you can see that is what it said right here. Toward Israel's right hand, and brought them to Israel. Now look what he does. But Israel stretched out his right hand and put it on the head of Ephraim, like this. The younger, and crossing his hands, put his left hand on Manasseh's head, although Manasseh was the firstborn. So instead of putting his hands on like this, he does this. So he's giving the greater blessing to Ephraim and not to Manasseh. Evidently, Israel knows something. He sees something that Joseph doesn't even see.
No, he doesn't. He's a stir.
When Joseph saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was a mistake and took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. Joseph said to his father, "Not that way, my father. This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." He said, "You're supposed to bless this one. This is the firstborn." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a tribe, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, the younger brother will be greater than he." So he's making a prophecy here. He's already seeing into the future. So Israel has gotten a little smarter over the years. He's gotten a little closer to God. He's gotten a little more closer with the covenant through the birthright, through what he has, through his being passed. Does he understand all about it? No, I'm quite sure not. But he knows many things here. Genesis 49:1. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come." Did you just see what he just said? Yeah. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. And this is where he starts. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to read a couple. Reuben, who is supposed to be the firstborn, supposed to have the birthright, supposed to have the double portion. He says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first fruits of my virility. Excelling in prominence, excelling in power, turbulent as water, you will no longer excel, because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. He got into my bed." And if you read back in 35:22, while Israel was living in the region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard about it. What did I say about this family? This is a messed up bunch. He goes in and sleeps with his stepmom. This is a messed up crowd. 49:5. Then he goes to Simeon. He says, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter their council. May I never join their assembly. For in their anger they kill men." What was he talking about? He was talking about what they did because of what happened to their sister Dinah. So he's talking about them. So here he's going down the list. He said, you're not worthy of a birthright. You're not. And goes all the way down. And he gets, does Judah deserve a birthright? What did he do? He fathers a child with his daughter-in-law. And then wants to put her to death. But here's what Israel says about Judah. "Judah, your brothers will praise you." What's Judah mean? Praised or praising. He says, "Your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Judah is a young lion." Now remember that phrase. "My son, you returned from the kill. He crouches, he lies down like a lion or a lioness. Who dares to rouse him?" Look at this line. "The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes." What lineage did Jesus come from? Out of the 12 tribes, the 12 sons, what lineage did Jesus come into the world from? Judah. He says, "The scepter will not pass from you until the rightful owner," I'm making this, "till the rightful owner comes to take this." In Revelation 5:5, it says, "Then one of the elders said to me, 'Stop crying. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah.'" What did he say about him? "You'll be like a lion of the tribe of Judah. The root of David has been victorious, so that he may open the scroll and its 7 sealed." Then I saw one like a slaughtered lamb standing between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders. In Israel's family, so we can see all this stuff that they did. One of the boys slept with her mother-in-law. We see what Judah did. We see what Simeon and Levi did. We see all the evil that his family has done, but yet they're still God's chosen people. Why? Because God made a covenant with Abraham. When God makes a covenant, when he makes a promise, he never changes his mind and never backs up. If it had not been for that covenant made with Abraham that was passed by birthright to Isaac and to Jacob and to the nation of Israel, this Messiah would never have come into the world. Genesis 50:15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused. They're saying, I got to get finished here. We're running out of time. So they sent this message to Joseph before he died, and you go through all this and you read what he did. He said, look, we'll serve you. We'll do whatever we got to do. We don't want you to kill us. Or your dad's dead. And Joseph said to him, don't be afraid. God had a plan here. He sent me here. He sent me here with a plan, and he's working that plan out. Don't worry. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to take care of you. And in 50:20, the last chapter of the book of Genesis, 22nd verse, Joseph was 110 years old, and he's dying, and he tells him, you promise me this, when you return to the land of my fathers, take my bones with you. He knew that they were going to be returning. How many years later was it they returned? About 400 years. That's a long time to wait. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones from here. Any questions? I was not looking at the time, and it got away from me. There's a lot of material there. We went from a long way out here to here. If I'd have read it all, it would have taken more time than what we took with it. So we can see that God made a promise, made a covenant with Abraham that's passed down through the line, all the way through the lineage, and it became a nation and became a mighty nation and had probably 2 or 3 million people came out of Egypt when they were delivered in the book of Exodus, which is where we'll be going from here. Any questions or comments?